Hello, mate, to Thrive Nation. It's going to be an incredible session today because I'm going to be talking about biological medicine and a center in Arizona founded by Dr. Jeoff Drobot. He's the founder and director of this American center, and he's doing medicine very differently. I've been doing functional medicine for 18 years, and we're going to find out about bioregulatory medicine. So it's a privilege to have him on the show. Welcome, Dr. Jeoff Drobot.
Great to be here.
Brilliant. We got about 5-10 minutes to catch the audience and the viewers on YouTube with regards to grabbing their attention. You know how short these concentration spans have become out there. But let's talk about some archetypes and talk about the way you assess and then you treat and put interventions in place with someone with really brain fog, maybe a female, a male, someone really struggling with cognitive performance. We do an objective data-centric measurement by Dr. Dale Bredesen called a cognoscopy that has been really beneficial. But I think you've got some real incredible tools and assessment tools of these two different archetypes that come and see you, because I think people are struggling with anxiety and depression and just adrenal burnout and fatigue like never before. So give us just an incredible story of assessment to treatment and intervention with those two archetypes in mind.
Right. When we have anybody over 20, right, and we say, like, we have to do central nervous system testing and autonomic nervous system because we have to look at both of these, right? In medicine, there's really no blood test to do that. That's why people go and they say I have chronic fatigue or I have cognitive decline. And then as physicians, we do these iron tests and thyroid tests and we say, screw off, you're good. Like, and then you start on this path. I always have. We see a bunch of pro athletes, so we treat people like they're pro athletes. We have to do these heart rate variabilities, and it's not Oura rings and Whoop bands. Like, you actually have to do the testing. And then central nervous system EEGs. When you put those together with hormone studies, and then we look at, like, can we produce cellular energy? When you put those three things together, central nervous system studies, autonomic nervous system studies, hormone studies, and you put all those soups together and you see where's the hole in the bucket. And then, of course, you have to have treatments, because what's the point of seeing it? The person already knows they're tired. When you put these treatments together, which are mainly physics, we do whole brain TMS, exercise with oxygen therapy, hyperbarics, microcurrent. Like, when you put those things together and you light up the central nervous system and you feed the autonomic nervous system with electrons and oxygen, magically computers come back online. And, it's still like cognitive decline is irritating to me because, again, in medicine, we don't really do anything with it. I guess in integrative medicine, we'll try to use supplements and bioidentical hormones, right, to address it. But just biologically, we just don't treat it, right? We try to add things and expect that the nervous system's going to respond. But unless we actually treat the nervous system, it's just more noise, right? When we do EEGs now or brain stem, and we look at what somebody comes in with, I guess, brain fog, or we get like a whole bunch of high performing people, and sooner or later, you're going to break it down, right? You're going to use more than you can put back, and then sleep and just the digital era of so much information coming in, things get tired. And we don't have a way to, like, pump air back into the tire. And that's where I think, again, bioregulatory medicine or the treatments that you end up having, that treat specifically the nervous system. I mean, people think it's magic, but it's adding more electricity to something and organizing, getting the noise out, and things just respond.
Okay, so let's go into the details. So let's talk about Jane. That's not her name. She comes in brain fog, tired, exhausted, feeling anxiety and depression. You do a QEEG, exactly what you do from a central nervous system assessment. What can the person expect, and why is it different just to integrative medicine and sort of functional medicine?
Because when so you've got a couple different things. People use biofeedback, neurofeedback, or else you're actually going to add electricity with TMS, right? We have all these. So when she comes in and we do that central nervous system testing, and it's maybe the central nervous system is good and the autonomic nervous system is busy, but whatever thing is wrong, you have to use a specific treatment. Most of the time with Jane that comes in, right, we're going to do whole brain TMS, and we're going to add oxygen to it or do ozone blood therapies. We're going to oxygenate the tissue, and then we're going to add those electricity to the brain And then the brain is going to respond like it always does. Like if you add electricity to the muscle, it's going to use it and it's going to start to form new neural pathways. And we're going to see that fog lift. It's for people that don't have head injuries, right? If you just come into fatigue and maybe it's post-pregnancy, maybe it's like post-illness that we see viral infections now, of course, a lot. Like, again, if you treat the body and you just eliminate the lymphatic irritation, you stimulate the nervous system, it pretty much happens, right? Now, it takes 40 sessions of TMS, in my experience.
Let's just describe that now, because people are listening, they've probably never heard that. We haven't had someone like you in terms of biomedical and bioregulatory medicine come on, so we do need a definition of that. But what is brain TMS in terms of 40 sessions now with someone who's got the profile of, you know, for want of a better word, adrenal burnout, brain fog, exhaustion, mental fatigue, just absolute overwhelm?
So when you're doing, you have to treat something from the neck up and something from the neck down, because you'll always put adrenal fatigue and mental fatigue in the same bucket, right? Looking at the neck down, we'll do the hormone tests. So then oftentimes, again, you'll see anabolic hormones like testosterone, DHEA, pregnenolone, you know that, you'll see those low. But then neck up, we have to have a way that we treat the brain. There's nothing that we do that treats the brain besides crossword puzzles, right? And that just making the brain work harder is not what you're supposed to do. So we'll say, oh, just do more work. Like, you got to be engaged. It's either that or quit your job for 6 months and see what happens. Yeah. Like, that's the only thing we have. And in mental performance, just like physical performance, you need to actually do treatments on the organ. Your brain is an organ. So transmagnetic stimulation, or TMS, what we're doing is doing whole brain. Normally people just do a part of the brain for depression or anxiety. But when you do whole brain TMS, what you're doing is you're adding electricity and magnetic stimulation to the organ, which is the brain. Then the brain is going to respond, just like if you did bicep curls, the bicep is going to respond. You have to do it for a series of days, and then we can repeat the EEG. And 9 times out of 10, we're going to see that the EEG shows more electrical activity in the brain because you did the stimulation in the closed stat. So normally if somebody comes here and they're high performing, or they just want to get back to high performing, we'll look at the organ, the brain, right? That will be tired. We've got to add some kind of exercise program to the brain. And that's why I laugh at crossword puzzles, or not doing anything. That's what we have in medicine. Either get engaged in something or don't do anything. That's really your 2 options. But when you're actually treating the brain with either electrical stim or transmagnetic stimulation, and you're adding electricity or you're adding stimulation to the brain always responds. Right.
Okay, so now are these assessments that you've, you know, I know QEEG, we had Dr. Andrew Hill, who does neurofeedback on the podcast, but are these EEGs you've trained yourself and the other physicians, or their courses? Or if like, we get a lot of physicians from South Africa and beyond that listen, so they're in functional medicine, do they need to go on a specific course? And this is a medical device that does this TMS, and that's different to just electrical stimulation as well. One's magnetic, one's electrical.
Yes. So if you look at, there's not that many. We use a machine from Denmark. So when you're doing, like, there's 2 different parts of it. We're going to do the assessment. We use something called Cognitrix, which is a great EEG machine, right? The assessment's different than the treatment. And then to do the TMS, we use a machine out of Denmark. So, I mean, neurofeedback, which again, I love. So let me tell you how I started in all this, right? We got a lot of athletes that have concussions. So irritating, because the person's trying to get back. And again, that's just a treatment of time. Like, how do you stop a football player from getting hit in the head, right? We got all these pro athletes, which again, my background is in exercise physiology, and we need to get them back on the field. End of story. However, we're going to do that the quickest and the best way. We have to find treatments that enable us to do that. So we started with biofeedback and microcurrent, just adding electricity, because again, it was just time. You have to take time off. Then when we were doing QEEGs, I'm like, okay, I like that. But neurofeedback to me was so complicated, right? It was just like, we're practicing all this stuff. Maybe it gets decent, but nobody is in Like very few practitioners can do neurofeedback because it's like doing a chess match, right? They always make it so complicated. We're lighting this stuff. And I was like, why don't we just go ahead and treat the brain? Why do we have to find the secret sauce all the time? Because neurofeedback was just organizing brain activity that wasn't organized, but it wasn't adding anything to the brain, right? It was just organizing it. So then I said, well, that's too complicated for me. Let's start to add oxygen and electricity to the brain, because we know hyperbarics, like hard chamber hyperbarics, we know we do that on stroke patients, and magically, like, things start to resolve. And so I started getting into brain stimulation, and the ultimate ends up being transmagnetic stimulation, which again is a huge machine. It does what it's supposed to do. So it's not like something like biofeedback, where if you don't know what you're doing, you might do something, you might not. You do have to be specialized in doing this. But in my experience, that whole brain transmagnetic stimulation with hard chamber hyperbarics, and then you can add NAD, like that was the deal. Neurofeedback, I like it. I still do it, but I'm so lazy now that I'll just go and add electricity into the person or the brain and combine that with oxygen. And then, like you said, treat neck down with hormones, which is pretty boring like nowadays, but we can do that. And when you combine those together, like it really did like make a huge impact. And that's probably now my favorite thing to treat is people with central nervous system troubles, or high performers that like can only go and then they got to sleep for 3 days, and then they go and they can sleep for 3 days. Like you can make such a good deal in this field of longevity by treating central nervous systems that I would never not do it. And for people that are listening or physicians, it's like chronic fatigue when you're trying to treat that. And again, you're using adrenal supplements. I mean, we have so many treatments here, doing blood filtering, doing all this kind of stuff, and then just treating it without being able to treat the actual brain. It would just be so frustrating. Like it's
Okay,
just,
so what happens to Jane? She does how many sessions of you
Jane
saying
does 40
NAD?
sessions, but at the end of 10 sessions, we're still doing the EEGs. Like, and we're seeing responses on the EEGs, right? Which was tough when I was doing other neurofeedbacks. So Jane is going to be here for 2 weeks. Jane's going to do a whole bunch of oxygenation treatments and TMS. Then we're going to do, after 10 treatments, we're going to do repeat the EEG, make sure the brain is responding. And then we're just adding electricity. It takes a little while for their neural system to catch up. But after 3 weeks, like Jane is like in a different spot, right? Jane cognitively is in a different spot. Hormonally, it takes a little bit of time, as you know, but cognitively, like when that central nervous system is not as noisy and it's repaired, like physically, a lot of magical things happen. So at the end of 3 weeks, we release Jane back into the wild, right? Jane is then able to put more work on her central nervous system. Jane's hormones are probably medicated because I'm not going to deal with that, right? Especially with Jane, if she's menopausal and has no hormones, or females are a little bit trickier because for 2 weeks they have progesterone, for 2 weeks they don't. Guys are stupid. We just need testosterone. Nothing's going to vary as far as a menstrual cycle. We can just do this. But for females, that's why chronic fatigue affects them more, as we have periods of time where hormones are elevated, where we actually can do things for the central nervous system. And then we have 2 weeks where we don't have progesterone, where it's really difficult to do that for the central nervous system. So normally Jane's hormones are medicated. Jane's central nervous system has been recharged. Jane's lymphatic system has been drained. And Jane's cellular system has been stimulated. When we do that to any animal, because we're just mammals, and we release them back into the wild, 9 times out of 10, something good is going to happen. In medicine, we make this so complicated because we forget about biology and physiology. We don't test it. And again, functional medicine was always funny because, I do it, but we test 50,000 things, and then we take 50,000 things to change a piece of lab work, but we actually didn't do anything on the organ, right? We didn't do it. Like we actually didn't set it up. We didn't cast the arm to make sure the fracture was going to go away. We just took a bunch of mineral supplements and pretended like if you kept your arm still enough, that would happen. So, like I said, I'm lazy now. I have a clinic that's full of treatments. Instead of taking things, I'd rather do things on people. And then 9 times out of 10, when you release them back in the wild, something positive happens. Then when the physiology is set up into a better position, like good stuff happens.
Okay, so now Jane has to take 2 weeks off work and she gets an EEG, then she gets TMS every single day, or she gets EBOO or extracorporeal blood ozone and oxygenation, or you do EWAT, or you do 10 pass ozone. Firstly, what
All of that.
oxidative therapies are you doing? Number one. And then two, does she need to do it every day? So she takes 2 weeks off.
Yes,
And then
2 weeks off, come to the clinic, because again, we need to put that physiology, like I like to do repeated stimulation because it works better. So she takes 2 weeks off, which isn't a big thing considering you're just in mud anyways, right? So you might as well stop it. Come to the clinic. We do, again, lymphatic drainage, and then I add oxygen with singlet oxygen. Then we do oxygen with EWAT, then we'll do ozone. So I'll add significant amounts of oxygen. And again, 1 pass, 10 pass, EBO2 blood filtration, which all it is an oil change. Like for those that are listening, you need to change the oil, right? You need to add oxygen to it because, again, we know when the Olympics are on right now, we know that that would be illegal for an athlete to do. And that's why it's good, because it works, right? It's adding extra things so that your body can do extra things. That makes a lot of sense when you can't do normal things. Add extra things so your body can then get back on that level. So we'll continue lymphatic drainage, add oxygen, add electrons with PMF or microcurrent, and then do the brain stimulation. At the end of 2 weeks, your body is loaded, right? We've put it in an extra physiological state. So when you go back into the normal life, you'll have extra resources. And in that 2 weeks, like you see a lot of repair and healing that ends up happening, which again, putting the arm in a cast. And then things are in a new position to do new things. And I think in medicine, like we're good at acute medicine and we're crappy at chronic medicine. And this chronic fatigue has been such a problem because of these computers, right? Everybody's able to do a million more things. Me and you are having this talk. You're in South Africa. I'm in Scottsdale, Arizona. So like central nervous systems are stimulated more than they ever have been. Viral and immune systems are low. So viral infections are super duper interesting now because they have the ability to have no competition. And then I'm 50, right? We just get older and hormones end up going faster than they should. And by the end of it, like physiology is just broken down. So
okay, so
if you
Jane
don't,
comes out after 2 weeks. She's feeling great. She goes back into a toxic environment. Does she has to come once a week, once a month? What does she need to do generally? Of course, if she needs magnesium and she needs DHEA and she needs
yeah,
those things, fine. She carries on, but that often is not sustaining people. That's why we're seeing this plethora of mental ill health and distress like never before. I've never seen so many patients with anxiety and depression in 25 years of practice. So
correct.
now she goes back into that environment. You call her in once a month, or does she get a device at home? Does she do
You
the
get the device at
EEG?
home. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I still like David Delight units, which are audio visual entrainment. If you look
Just
up like,
just explain that, Dr. Jeff, we're having you on because we've never heard this in 217 shows. I've been running this podcast 4 years, never missed a single week, never missed a single day in 25 years of practice to sickness or ill health. Okay. So when I do something, I do it consistently, but we need to get into the nitty gritty details of this because this is new in South Africa. This is not around. We even need to talk about the science of TMS and what happens from a medical legal perspective in terms of the training, the research, and that, because that is fundamentally important. But let's
exactly.
just finish Jane. So Jane gets what, and just go slowly on this because my audience and my viewers have never heard of a lot of this.
So we need something for Jane to do at home to keep that nervous system in a parasympathetic state. So Jane's system, you have two switches. One's either a sympathetic system or a paras. Either run away from a lion, rest, digest, and repair. That's all your body's doing. Am I going to get eaten or can I rest and just digest? That's the only two things your body's doing. Nervous systems are very primitive. However, when Jane goes home, Jane goes back around lions. I guarantee you, right? Our body said, this is a better experience. Why didn't I just pack my hobo sack and stay in Scottsdale? Because my body was actually doing better. Why am I going back to Connecticut where I got kids in this job that's just triggering? Your body, like, it doesn't like that, right? If it was in a better position, it likes to stay in a better position. So we need some external way to get the system to stay in a parasympathetic response. I like a machine called a David Delight. It's audio-visual entrainment. It's super old and it works so good. And what that does do is it puts your brain in a state where it has a parasympathetic response. When you do that, it's like learning a language. When you're at home and you're doing that for 30 minutes every single day, sooner or later, you're going to learn that new language, which means that your body is going to learn what a parasympathetic state ends up being. What that allows it to do is now we've had this 2 weeks where we've added a new computer program, and then we're going to do 2 months of audio-visual entrainment to sink it in. And then what invariably every single person will say after 30 days is, I am more calm. And then it's like, you're more calm because number one, your brain had the ability and the electricity to do something different, get out of the state it was. And then we've learned a new language, which everybody had when they dropped out of the womb. There's nothing fancy about it. As a baby, you had it. As a mammal, you had it, right? You're supposed to be able to lay down and be safe. But if there's so much stimulation, your brain forgot how to do it. So that's all it is. It's like learning a new range, relearning a range of motion on a shoulder. If you practice it, it's going to entrain and it's going to be there. And so Jane is doing her audio-visual entrainment with her device because, again, a supplement can't do it. Meditation is funny. I think that's funny, to take somebody that's tired or has a brain that's so active and give them one more thing to do, right? To say like, stop it. And they'll say, if I could have stopped it, I wouldn't see you. And then when you actually do the electrical studies, you're like, yeah, like that's like taking a shoulder that's torn and saying, just do like shoulder presses. You'll just make it stronger. It'll get better. And the person's like, no, right? I can't add anything more to this, right? There's one more thing because invariably, like, again, we do diaphragmatic breathing and meditation, but take yourself offline and use tech, right? Because tech will put your brain and your nervous system in a position and then just hold it there. And so I like to get Jane to do stuff at home, actually do it instead of take it, because the next time we do the EEG or we do some autonomic nervous system training, it holds it. So Jane will never not do her David Delight when she needs it. But for that last 30 to 60 days, again, audio-visual entrainment, magic.
Okay, so is the David Delight similar to like a brain tap where you get the lights and the audio, or is it totally different to that?
Similar. Like, it doesn't matter how you do it, right? When you put that brain in a certain state, like the autonomic nervous system, it's just like sleep. Doesn't matter how you do it. Like when you get into deep sleep, like your body regenerates. It does. So all you need to do is mimic how you're going to get your brain into that state. And so I think, again, in our world, you're in our world, right? Where we're doing this biohacking performance stuff. We make things so complicated. We're saying this is this and that is that and PMF. It's like, put the organ in a position to be advantageous. And then magically, a lot of other things happen. I don't care where we use brain tap. People use muses. I like David Delight. Anything that I can use that's going to put the brain in that parasympathetic state and hold it there, the rest of the body is going to respond. Always does.
But you got to give them the energy first. You got to do the TMS, you got to do the oxidative therapies, and you got to really try and, just give them a boost when they're not getting all the sympathetic drain or overdrive in the environment. So that there's a crucial part to actually give back oxygen and give back energy and give back the electrical stimulation.
I think so, right? But I only think so because I've done it for 20 years and have it all, right? Like when you have everything, you do everything. Because again, I don't care what worked, right? Like when you add oxygen and electrons to anybody, like every cell is going to do something better. So just out of nature, when somebody comes in fatigue, just like if you drive your car into the mechanic, like they're going to change your oil, they're going to change your spark, they're going to do it all because they know your car is going to run better, right? Oftentimes, unfortunately, in medicine, we have specialties. So you only do one thing because you're that specialist. So if you're whatever, a conventional or an alternative doctor that just focuses on the gut, that's all you're going to do, right? You're just going to do the gut stuff. And it's like, yeah, but even though that's important, like there's a lot of other organs that are going to add to make sure that that gut stuff gets better. So we have so much stuff because, again, I didn't care what worked. I wanted to treat it. And when you get a sick person and you make them normal, it's no different than making a normal person really good, high performer. And it's no different than making an athlete an extra athlete. Like it's all the same physiology. So I think you would do it all.
Okay, so let's talk about the research and just studies and just sort of who's doing TMS, who can do TMS. I mean, you've obviously, I think you've got 2 clinics, Scottsdale, Arizona, and then you've got another clinic as well when I researched. But who can do this TMS and the training involved to do TMS?
Well, any physician can do TMS. Like you're still doing something. You need a medical license to do something with it, right? So TMS, there's probably only 3 places in North America that do whole brain TMS, which is unfortunate. So if they were to look up brain frequency, right, that's probably the software that I use to do the whole brain TMS because it has the assessment and then we use the treatment to do it. But there's only 3 places, which is crazy when you think about it. And no place in South Africa, I bet. Europe's very early with it because, again, these central nervous system problems, like you see every day, like how long you've been in practice?
25 years.
Only in the last 3 has this become a problem, right? Where you're like, man, what the hell, right? Like
Another
at
level.
least have mono or a concussion, have something. But now I have 10-year-olds, right? Like everybody's on Adderall, every teenage girl's on an antidepressant and birth control pills. Like we've had such a problem because, again, digitally, we've irritated the nervous system so much that the central nervous system can't keep up. So in the last 3 years, which would I would concur with you, which we'd be like, and everybody seems to have a nervous system that's either wired or tired, right? Nobody has one that's normal anymore. And there's very, very few clinics that actually treat brains as an organ. So anybody can do TMS, anybody could do neurofeedback with a medical license, anybody could do brainstem with a license. All it takes is you got to go and be
brainstem? Why are you separating them there? You're saying TMS, brainstem, and then electrical stimulation. They're 3 different
right.
things.
So if I would organize it, and again, people will push back on me, but I would say there's organizing things like biofeedback, right? And then there's a little extra organizing things with neurofeedback. Then there's adding electricity to the brain or stimulating with brainstem, and then adding the most electricity to the brain, which is TMS. So like we have these levels of how much electricity or how much organization do we do to the brain. And again, there's going to be very few clinics that actually focus on doing any one of those, which now in the world of mental health, or we'll say brain performance, because I don't want to say mental health, because everybody's like, well, is this in my head? And it's like, no, it's actually in the organ, right? Like, stop doing this, right? Like we have this where everything is psychology. And then, of course, it's more frustrating because somebody's like, I don't know what's wrong. And they're like, you're depressed. And they're like, I don't really have anything to be depressed about. And then we go into this past life regression to find out, like, who did that to you 5 centuries ago? And then we're doing this meditation with cold plunging to get enlightened and go on a spirit walk. It's like, stop, right? Do an EEG and see the organ doesn't work and treat it. And I guess when you do that, like I said, and you're doing different levels and you're actually treating the brain, you know, that works out great. They can go if like anybody's really interested for cognitive decline. I have another business called cerebralfit.com. And I don't want to say all it is, but infrared helmets, lighting up the brain and audiovisual entrainment with some cerebral stimulation with ear clips. When you do and you look at studies on like Alzheimer's or cognitive decline, it works pretty well. It's like a treadmill for the heart. Like it's just going to work. And all, again, I won't say all we're doing, but again, when you light up the brain and you add electricity and you stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system, ultimately the organ gets better. And that's just cerebralfit.com.
Okay, we're going to
May
do that.
look
We're going to talk
technical.
about that because You know, South Africa's the second most stressful country to live in the world, according to Bloomberg. We've got real significant issues here, just from a safety perspective. We've got sympathetic overdrive like you've never seen before. Just
Right.
from a safety perspective, it's very, very tough. It's survival. It's not about thriving here for most people. It's just survival, you know, and it's higher walls and electricity, you know, electric fences. I mean, it is crazy stuff. It is like the wild, wild west here. But the bottom line is, I think we need to try and move people into the parasympathetic. So you've developed this helmet that is first, it's red light therapy or infrared, and then it's an audio visual, and then is it adding electrical current, or exactly what it is? Because I'm very interested
Correct.
in.
Yeah. All those. So when you add photons, right? Plus, we know red light drains the lymphatic system, which is the lymphatic system in the brain. So when we just do that, it's again lighting up, putting photons in a brain or in an organ, like it increases energy in the cell. When you increase energy in any cell, when it happens to be in the brain, you get it so that it heals and drains faster. So yeah, you drain it, you add photons to it, you put the body in a parasympathetic state. And then we also use an intra to hit all the brain. We use a nasal laser. So we light the entire brain up, works great. And we put the brain in a parasympathetic state. And then voila, again, when you just treat the whole organ or the whole brain, like a lot of things get better. And the amount of research on whole brain light therapy, again, even though in medicine we never use it, is immense. So when you're in South Africa and we have anybody in a sympathetic state and you take them out of it, like the body just naturally recovers, but you have to put that central nervous system in that state.
That's true. And that's why we're a big believer in sauna space and infrared saunas, and using these incandescent bulbs and making sure people get enough red light and infrared. And it's been a game changer in many aspects. So okay, so we'll get onto that a bit later in terms of how I can get those details. And you don't have any suppliers here at all in South Africa, do you?
No, but that doesn't mean there shouldn't be, right?
No,
Like,
no, geez, we get Brain Tap in. We've brought in Brain Tap. We've brought in a lot of products. Apollo from Dr. David Rayburn. We've brought in,
yeah.
you know, the Flex Beam from. So we bringing in this stuff from a biohacking. I don't think it's biohacking is the wrong word, but it's health optimization, brain optimization, central nervous system optimization, because I think that's fundamentally important. Okay, so let's talk quickly about the research, the medical research on TMS. This is FDA approved? Is there a body of research behind it in terms of, and the risks of doing TMS? Is this a course that someone can go on if someone's listening from a functional medicine aspect? Just give us the ins and outs of the research and the possible risks.
So unfortunately, TMS is like, again, in medicine, we like to approve things based on like one condition. So usually TMS was used for medication-resistant depression, right? You use one spot of the brain, you hammer, 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 and then if you were resistant to medication, TMS was one of those things that actually worked. Unfortunately, we never did it. We never studied it on doing it in the entire brain. Like for whatever reason in medicine, we took one therapy and we just focused it on one area of the brain, and we never really developed like what happens when we do it on all areas of the brain. So you'll see it's old. TMS is old, right? This is an old therapy just used in a new form and used on the entire brain, and actually used with, again, the EEG, which is the assessment part of it. And instead of, because in depression, like nobody actually measured the brain. They just said, put this magnet here and put the jackhammer, turn it up to 90 and just hammer on it. And we'll see if we can shock this person out of their depression. So like you see, like they're in central nervous system and brain stuff, there's tons of research on all of it. Just in medicine, we've never treated it. Which, like, again, when you do whole brain infrared and you look at the amount of literature on it, it's immense. Do you ever see it in a clinic? Never. Right? I don't know why we have a habit in brains of like, we do all this studies, because people are like, are there any studies on this? And I'm like, thousands. Are there any places that treat it? 3. So we're not going to be short of studies. We've already proved that it's very, very safe because, again, this stuff has decades of research behind it. It just has no clinical application because it doesn't treat a specific condition. right? Nowadays, we're treating brains in this biohacking world because people are freaking tired, right? People don't have a medical condition. They're just freaking spent and tired. Or they want to live to be 120 and remember their name. All these things are noble causes, but we don't necessarily have a medical condition besides everybody's got anxiety at some time in the day and then depression at another time of the day because they're freaking tired, right? And that's all that we have. We have a bunch of people that have taken an organ such as their brain. They've done too much of it for too long. Nobody takes a vacation. There's no Sunday without a phone, right? There's a bunch of mental stimulation and the environment is full of toxicity. You add all those together and brains go through a lifespan quicker than they ever were intended to, and they end up tired. And so we just don't have, like, there's tons of research, like I said, on stuff, but we have nothing that just treats like the brain as in it would be tired, because obviously it is. And you know yourself, and the practitioners know, that you didn't have 40-year-olds with no testosterone 10 years ago. Like, stop, right? Like, we used to talk about adrenal fatigue, but I didn't see 35-year-olds doing testosterone needles because I didn't see a 30-year-old with no testosterone unless we had testicular cancer, right? And we had a testicle removed. So obviously these are, we'll say, new generation conditions. They're not diseases, but they're just overuse conditions, and the environment is putting so much of a load on central nervous systems and endocrine systems that we've run out of the ability to reload nervous and hormone systems. And if you don't, everybody gets tired. So I think,
but why are there only 3 clinics, Dr. Drobot? Then, I mean, if it's so good, you know, I've been doing, is it expensive?
Equipment's expensive, right? Like, stuff's expensive. As physicians, we're like, well, I'm not spending my own money, right?
Well, how much are we talking about in terms of, like, you need the EEG to assess it, and then you need the TMS? What are we looking
so you're in that for $100,000, like you're over $100,000 to get into it, right? But again, for me, like, the result is what I'm after. So when you're doing, like, when you have tech, like, you're gonna invest. That's your medical practice. Like, you got to invest because the result is important. So yeah, you're in it. That equipment, like brain stim to do that, is 50 grand, and TMS is over 100. But let me tell you, I haven't seen something as magical as doing that stuff for fatigue that didn't equate to spending the money. It's just like, as physicians, it's tough because you're like, oh, am I going to spend it? For me, again, I'm just going at it, right? I have for 25 years. I'm too deep now. So, like, nothing would change. I'm just going to go and try something. I have a whole museum of crap that didn't work, that I would be a rich man if I didn't spend it. But I'm still, like, ultimately interested in human physiology and performance. Selfishly, I would spend 100 grand on myself anyways to try to do this. So to be I consider myself reckless with my energy. I'm on planes all the time doing stuff. So again, as physicians, when you can use stuff to treat yourself, you have to invest in the practice. So that's the hardest thing, I think, is the physician's got to invest.
Okay. All right. So I had Brandon Crawford, the functional neurologist, on the show, talk about his laser. Is that something that you do, number one? And then maybe you want to talk about PEMF and talk about rebounding, because you've spoken quite a lot of that on your social channels. But is the laser very different to the red light and the cerebrofit that you were talking about? Is that something else you add?
I think so. Like, functional neurology, which again I like. There was a guy named Ted Carrick, and he has a Carrick. I went down a bunch of athletes with concussions. So there used to be a guy named Gonzalez who also used to use a red light. But when you're doing, again, whole brain stuff, right? Like, I like lasers. I like those lights. I like functional neurology. I refer to functional neurologists, which are chiropractors that are trained in one extra thing. But it was still like, I'm too lazy to not believe that treating the whole organ with complete light is better than using one part of it and trying to specialize medicine with a laser. So however you're going to do it when you're adding photons or you're adding electrical or photonic energy to the brain, like things get better. Functional neurologists are amazing, right? Because they go through neural pathways and they're going to go correct old neural pathways, which I think are great. I just add it to the whole brain.
Okay.
So anytime like you add light with a certain power density to the brain and you light it up, good things happen, right? Like it just does.
Brilliant. Let's talk about PEMF and talk about rebounding as we come to the end of the show.
So again, if we just add electrons in any form, right? Again, I think we've made in this biohacking thing, and you know this, like it's just the secret sauce, right? Everybody's got something, and we're just going to add in this new mat. We got this other thing, and then it's better than this thing. And it's like, guys, it's electrons, right? When you add electrical energy to something, and then you put a frequency to it, which has a specificity, because every organ has a certain phone number that, again, you can dial up and you can light up that organ in the brain, which means now it is more open to blood flow and resources. But ultimately, I always like PMF because you added electricity to an organ. And when the organ has more electricity, it can do more work. However, you're going to do it. Either you're going to use it externally to do more power or internally to do more repair. So I always got into, again, electricity, oxygen, and photons. I just always found that if I added in whatever form or machine that you added, if you added photons, electrons, and oxygen, cells respond by producing more ATP, and lymphatics respond by opening up and draining. Whatever organ happened to be in the neighborhood that I was doing that, it ended up to do better things than it was before I did that. Rebounding was just a great way, again, to move lymphatics, because if you didn't move lymphatics and you added something, I found that it was tough because it was just doing too many things. It's like listening to 5 songs. I might like all 5, but our bodies are pretty primitive that it needs to have like more simplicity so that it understands what I want to do. Again, we understand this in working out. If you go to the gym and you do every single machine, you don't get the results as if you do something focused one day and then you go back and you do something different the next day. Like our bodies are still pretty simplistic in the sense that if you want something done, you have to get the messaging clear, and then you just have to add the stimulus or resources, and you'll always get the response. Biologically, we have the ability to do that. Nowadays, unfortunately, when you just add and everything's so noisy, you couldn't get any response. So again, photons, oxygen, electrons, drain lymphatics.
There you go. There you go. Okay. What is Dr. Jeoff Drobot excited about in the future? I mean, anything else that's on the horizon that you're like, oh my goodness, this is going to change the game? Because I mean, 3 clinics in the whole of the US. I mean, that's just, yes, it's whatever, 150,000 US. It just seems that if the results were so good, you know, I mean, doing PRP and Prolo, it's so conservative in this country. In the States, it's exponentially increasing. And I ask people why they don't do it, and it's expense and it's training and it's this, and there's always something, you know, that comes
Always
in the
something.
way. Yeah.
Yeah.
But what are you excited about personally? Because I mean, you've been doing this for a long time. And the reason I wanted to focus on mental performance and brain health is I think that's the biggest bleeding point out there. I think it's causing the biggest issues, you know. And so people want to focus on hormones and they want to focus on gut and they want to focus on, but there's a problem with the central nervous system and the energy of the central and peripheral nervous system, which I'm seeing more and more of.
I just don't like, I can't treat without treating the center. It was always the biggest hole that I had because, again, like we do it all, right? It's easy to take some hormones, right? Hyperbarics, people think they're exciting. Like I do it, so I think it's exciting, but always that central nervous system. And with the amount of cognitive decline that we have these days, I don't know how you just people gloss over that and just say like, oh, it's kind of normal to like, oh, you can't remember your name at 65. Oh yeah, Jim. And it's like, no. Like 20 years ago, that was a big deal,
Yeah.
right? Like 20 years ago, if you said like a 60-year-old had Alzheimer's, like you were like, what the, like, or a 30-year-old had breast cancer, or like Jim is 40 on testosterone shots. You're like, what the hell? Like, did you go through chemo? They're like, what happened? So I'm always going to be more interested in central nervous system stuff because, again, this is a tough life, right? Like the sympathetic nervous systems are failing, right? People are failing. And chronic disease, it's impossible to treat it if you don't treat central nervous system stuff. So I'm always going to double down on central nervous system technology because if you just did nothing but treated the central nervous system, a lot of stuff got better. And again, I like treating guts and hormone, but it's so boring now to treat that stuff because, again, my machines treat it. Like, there wasn't, as a physician, if you're doing testing and you're doing gut testing and all of a sudden you're like, okay, if I do a central nervous system test and it sucks, I don't care what you do to the gut.
Yeah,
I really don't. Right? You can tell me like, oh yeah, all the brain chemistry is created in the gut. And I'm like, absolutely it is. But if the nervous system isn't online, why work downstream from that? Like, you're coming in as a baby with it. You're going to go out as an adult with it. Hormones are just in the middle part of your life, right? If that central nervous system is compromised, nothing works.
You did.
So I will triple down on it any chance I get to, because in the next generation at 50, nobody's going to know their name, right? Like, that's all that's happening, because again, digitally, we're just going to keep increasing the amount of stimulation. Environmentally, like, the world is going to keep getting toxic, and food is changing all the time. So central nervous systems, which are our most sensitive system, and the one that wasn't supposed to be touched unless the pterodactyl got us and wrapped us across the head, those are being touched every single day. And they're not responding well.
Okay, so what are you excited about? Anything new that you're excited? You've been 25 years. Anything new that
brainstem? Yeah, brainstem. Like, research is so good. Like with AI, like with the amount of tech. So tech broke us down, but tech, like when you look at the world of cognitive improvement and brainstem, like there's lots and lots of great studies going on, and AI and just the ability to do these things in a smaller form factor. I think that's going to be magic. Will I see it in my lifetime? I sure hope so. But I mean, like, I'm going to see a lot more cognitive decline and chronic fatigue. I'm going to see that in the next 5 years. Like, I'm seeing tons of it. So, like, I am most excited about the ability for tech to impact human performance.
Okay.
That's what I'm excited about. Unfortunately, will we do that medically? All it takes is money and somebody that's interested in it. Like, the equipment's out there, the research is out there. There's a huge patient need, but like, you got to get into it and be excited about it, which it is very exciting and rewarding.
Brilliant. So you've already developed and invented CerebraFit, is that it? And then you're going to invent something else and look at it and say, okay, from a tech AI perspective, there's going to be something else that people can use at home. Obviously, it's going to be like easy to use and applicable to people, you know.
I sure hope so. Like, I am not a handyman. So everybody's like, oh, you've developed and done all this stuff. And I'm like, man, I can't turn my computer on, but I know really smart people and what I want. And then those smart people will get it done. And again, engineers, like, again, it is so fascinating. When I used to go to Europe 30 years ago, I used to stand back and watch these smart men and women as they showed me stuff that, again, we never used in medicine. And I was like, I'm going to use that. But there's brilliant people out there that already have a bunch of tech. And again, I'm going to double down and triple down on that, because I think it will become a form factor where, just like your treadmill in your house, you need to do stuff for your brain. That's why it's like brain fitness. Forget about biohacking or cognitive decline. Like, you need to treat your brain like an organ that's getting worked. If you treat your brain like an organ that's getting worked, and you just do a little bit of recovery 3 times a week, that brain will go for the rest of your life and be magical. If you're going to irritate it all the time, it's only got a couple things it can do. It's either going to get agitated with anxiety, or it's going to get tired with depression. Like, it's not that complicated. If you actually treat the organ, just treat it, foster it, stretch it out once in a while, add some electricity to it, add some recovery with sleep, put it in a position to do something, it regenerates pretty well, and it's magical.
So last question, because you're coming to the end, what do you do for your brain fitness and your brain health in terms of a weekly, do you do ozone once a week and then you're doing hyperbaric once a week? Are you doing EWAT once a week? What is your maintenance plan to keep your brain at the level and performance you'd like to keep it at until you're like 120?
So I will do audio visual entrainment and brain helmets. I will do that every single day when I get into work. And I don't need to. I don't. You can look, if you saw, I could take a picture for your audience. When I get into my clinic, I put singlet oxygen in my nose. I put an infrared helmet on, and I'll usually do some kind of parasympathetic therapy, whether it's lights or microcurrent or audiovisual entrainment. And I do that because for the rest of the day, I want to undo that, right? Like I have a need to go and run this machine hard. So I'm not an idiot. I know that I am going to have to put that in a state to make that succeed. So if you even did it 3 times a week, and again, my patients, they're not going to do it every single day and they don't have a big clinic, but when they do it 3 times a week, again, photons, electrons, and oxygen, like things get good. The rest of it, I'm doing blood filtering 3 times a year with my EBO2. I'm doing hyperbarics, 20 of them a year. I'm doing umbilical stem cells twice a year. Like I'm measuring my biological age because I want to see it. But I'm always messing with myself in a structured form. And it's not doing a bunch of stuff. It's just doing it in a structured form. And I'm going to live however long I'm living, but I'm going to run this machine hard. And I like the way that it's responding.
Okay. So just to repeat, you put oxygen, just traditional oxygen through the nose.
Singlet. I like singlet oxygen, right? So O1. I like
Yeah.
singlet oxygen. Again, I'm not going to complicate it, but I like to have singlet oxygen because that's the best one for the nervous system. I'm going to use my David Delights or some kind of microcurrent because I'm going to put my body in a parasympathetic state for 15 minutes. And I'm going to do some form of light therapy. Infrared helmets are the easiest. And I'm just going to add resources into my brain so that I can do that mentally, and then physically from the neck down, it's going to respond.
Brilliant. Message of hope, 2 minutes just to finish for the people listening out there who are really just struggling with their health and their wellness from Dr. Jeffrey Drobot.
There are so many good things out there, right? Like, unfortunately, people get into chat groups and we have this habit of overdoing things and taking a million things. But I'm going to tell these people that there's so many good things if you do them with a guided person, and if they have the technology, human physiology will respond. I know that the world's in an interesting spot and people are so tired, but technology can really put your body in a different spot, and we have all the tools to do it. You just have to know which organ needs the help, and you just have to put it in a position to respond, and it will respond.
Brilliant. I just want to declare favor and blessing over you, Dr. Jeff Drobot. You're an absolute hero, pioneer, and we will speak offline in terms of who I can connect with to get all this tech and get this to South Africa, because I think every single nation in the world needs it more and more, because I agree with you. The traditional model needs to change significantly. The functional medicine model has to change. Even the integrative needs to change to direct stimulation on the central nervous system.
We just have ignored it. I think we ignored it because it's expensive and complicated to do the test. And I'm not a techie, like I said, but now the world of tech has gotten to the point that novices like myself in the tech world can use this. And then the treatments, like I said, are magic. Yeah. It is magic, right? It is a magical way to treat.